Isabelle Dubois watched her future dissolve under the fluorescent lights of a sterile conference room. The man she loved, the man she'd conquered, sat beside her, his face the color of ash. Across the table, the mousy wife she'd so easily dismissed was calmly sipping her water. There was no screaming, no crying, just the quiet, methodical sound of a lawyer turning pages. Pages that proved the $500 million empire Isabelle had planned her life around was nothing more than a house of cards. And the woman she'd called a fool was holding the one match that could burn it all to the ground. To understand how the woman who thought she had won everything ended up with less than nothing, we have to go back to the beginning. Back to the moment the serpent first entered the garden. The Sterling family lived a life curated for the pages of an architectural digest. Their sprawling Greenwich, Connecticut estate was a testament to modern minimalism, a symphony of glass, steel, and Italian marble that overlooked the Long Island Sound. From the outside, it was a fortress of success. On the inside, it was a museum of a life that was quietly and almost imperceptibly coming apart. At the center of this world was Richard Sterling. At 52, he was the charismatic silver-haired CEO of Ethelred Technologies, a cybersecurity firm he had built from the ground up. He possessed the potent combination of a brilliant mind and a restless ego, an ego that had been nourished by 2 decades of fawning magazine profiles and Innovator of the Year awards. He believed with the unwavering conviction of a self-made man that the world revolved around his gravitational pull. His wife Eleanor Vance-Sterling was the silent partner in his ascent. They had met in college, 2 ambitious business majors with more ideas than money. In the early days of Ethelred, she wasn't just his wife. She was the co-founder, the COO, the one who drafted the business plans, negotiated the brutal first rounds of venture capital funding, and built the company's operational backbone, while Richard was the visionary, the salesman, the face. It was Eleanor who insisted on the ironclad clauses in their contracts, the meticulous fail-safes, and the stringent investor agreements that she called the foundation. Richard had called it paranoia. But after their second child, William, was born, Eleanor had stepped back. It was a joint decision, or so they told themselves. Richard needed to travel to network to be the sun in Ethelred's solar system. Eleanor, he argued, was the only one he trusted to raise their children. Olivia and William to manage their increasingly complex lives, to be the steward of their legacy. She traded her seat in the boardroom for a seat on the board of trustees at the children's private school. Her power suits were replaced by Lululemon and Brunello Cucinelli cashmere. She managed the homes, the staff, the investments, the charities, a CEO of a different, quieter empire. But quiet had a way of turning into silence. The 15-hour workdays that once felt like a shared sacrifice now felt like an absence. The dinners they used to spend debating market strategy were now spent with Richard scrolling through his phone, answering urgent emails, while Eleanor detailed the minutiae of their children's lives. The distance between them had grown not like a chasm, but like a hairline crack, slowly widening with each passing year until it was too wide to ignore, but too familiar to fix. Eleanor felt it in the way he no longer asked for her opinion on Ethelred's quarterly reports. She saw it in the way his eyes would glaze over when she talked about a problem at the school. He was a star, and her orbit had become distant, her light no longer visible to him. She was no longer his partner, but a part of the elegant scenery of his successful life. A beautiful, reliable, and utterly predictable fixture. Into this silent, gilded cage stepped Isabelle Dubois. She arrived at Ethelred Technologies not with a bang, but with a perfectly crafted proposal. At 28, Isabelle was a supernova of ambition. A PR consultant with a boutique firm, she was sharp, beautiful, and possessed a chameleon-like ability to be exactly what the person in front of her wanted. To the board, she was a data-driven prodigy with a revolutionary plan to rebrand Ethelred for a younger market. To the employees, she was an inspiring, approachable leader. And to Richard Sterling, she was a mirror. She didn't see the 52-year-old man who was starting to worry about his legacy. She saw the titan of industry, the visionary. She quoted his early interviews back to him. She listened with rapt attention as he recounted the old war stories of building the company, stories Eleanor had heard 1,000 times. She made him feel not like a husband and a father, but like the legend he believed himself to be. Eleanor met her for the first time at the company's annual charity gala. Isabelle was wearing a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a slash of color in a sea of tasteful navy and black. She approached their table with a dazzling smile. "Mrs. Sterling, it is an absolute honor," Isabelle said, her voice a low, cultured purr. "Richard speaks of you constantly, the silent architect of it all." Eleanor smiled, a tight, polite gesture she had perfected over years of corporate events. "He gives me too much credit. I've been out of the game for a long time." "Nonsense," Isabelle countered, her eyes flicking to Richard for a fraction of a second. "True talent doesn't just disappear. It becomes foundational." It was the perfect thing to say. Flattering, respectful, and utterly dismissive. It relegated Eleanor to the past, to the concrete buried beneath the gleaming new skyscraper Isabelle was helping to build. Richard beamed, placing a proprietary hand on the small of Isabelle's back. "Isabelle is a game changer, Elle, a real force of nature." Later that night, as they were getting ready for bed, Eleanor asked, "What do you think of her?" "Brilliant," Richard said, already distracted by his phone. "She's exactly what the company needs. Fresh energy." Eleanor looked at her husband's reflection in the dark glass of the bedroom window. She saw the familiar set of his shoulders, the way he held his phone like a lifeline to a world more exciting than this one. And she felt a cold dread creep into her heart. It wasn't just fresh energy Isabelle was bringing. It was a threat. The quiet, predictable foundation of her life was about to be tested, and she had a terrible feeling that the tremors had already begun. The affair didn't start with a clandestine hotel room. It started with a late-night text. Richard was in Singapore for a conference. Eleanor was asleep when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't the usual alert. It was a softer, more intimate chime he'd recently assigned. Half awake, she glanced at the screen. "Isabelle D. Just read the article in the Times. They called you the Oracle of Silicon Alley. They have no idea how right they are." Sleep well, Oracle. It was the Oracle that pricked Eleanor. It was an old nickname, one she had given him back in their tiny apartment when his wild predictions about the dot-com bubble had all come true. It was their private joke, a relic of a time when they were a team. To see it now repurposed by this young, ambitious woman felt like a theft. She didn't confront him. What would she say? That she was unnerved by a flattering text message. She would sound like the jealous, insecure wife she had never wanted to be. So she said nothing. She buried the unease and watched. Observation had always been her greatest strength. As a COO, she could spot inefficiencies in a system from a single spreadsheet. As a mother, she could tell which child was lying by the slightest hesitation in their voice. Now she turned that forensic attention onto her own husband. The signs were small, almost pathetic in their cliché. He started going to a personal trainer at a trendy downtown gym, not the familiar club near their home. He switched from the classic Tom Ford cologne he'd worn for a decade to a scent that was sharper, younger. His wardrobe began to feature slim-fit shirts and expensive, fashionable sneakers. Then came the work dinners and strategy sessions that stretched past midnight. Isabelle's name was dropped into conversation with studied casualness. Isabelle thinks we should pivot our marketing towards Asia. Isabelle found this incredible new restaurant for the client dinner.
Sahur.
Isabelle. 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 She was a ghost at their dinner table, a constant, invisible presence in their home. The true genius of Isabelle's campaign was its execution in plain sight. She wasn't just seducing Richard. She was weaving herself into the fabric of his life. She befriended his executive assistant, sending her flowers on her birthday. She sent a carefully chosen expensive gift to their daughter Olivia for her college graduation, a vintage fountain pen with a note congratulating her on her brilliant future. It was a move of breathtaking audacity, an attempt to build a bridge into the family she intended to supplant. Olivia had shown Eleanor the pen impressed. "She seems really nice, Mum." The breaking point for Eleanor came not with anger, but with a quiet, soul-crushing moment of invisibility. Richard was being honored at a large industry banquet in New York City. Eleanor had spent the afternoon getting ready, choosing a classic Carolina Herrera dress, feeling a flicker of the old excitement of being his partner on a public stage. They arrived at the cocktail hour, and Richard was immediately swarmed. Eleanor stood by his side, smiling and shaking hands. Then she saw Isabelle holding court across the room. Richard's eyes found hers, and for a moment he seemed to forget Eleanor was standing right next to him. He gave Isabelle a small, almost imperceptible nod, a private acknowledgement that felt more intimate than a kiss. A few minutes later, Richard was pulled away by a journalist. Eleanor found herself standing alone. She saw Richard, now free, making a beeline not for her, but for Isabelle. She watched as he leaned in his hand on her arm, his laughter booming in response to something she whispered. At that moment, watching them together under the grand chandeliers, Eleanor wasn't his wife. She was just another guest at his party, an obstacle. She walked away. She didn't make a scene. She simply slipped out of the ballroom, found a quiet alcove overlooking the city, and took a deep, shuddering breath. The grief was sharp and sudden, a physical pain in her chest. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the erasure. 25 years of her life of shared dreams and struggles were being overwritten by a newer, shinier story. Her phone rang. It was her son, William, calling from college. "Hey, Mum, just wanted to check in. How's the party?" Hearing his voice, steady and loving, was like a lifeline. "It's fine, honey. Your dad is schmoozing. Tell him I said congrats. Hey, are you okay?" "You sound weird." "I'm fine," she said, her voice stronger now. "Just tired." After she hung up, she stayed in the alcove for a long time. The hurt was still there, a hot, heavy stone in her stomach, but something else was beginning to form around it. It was cold, hard, and sharp. It was resolved. Richard had underestimated her. Isabelle had dismissed her. They saw her as a relic, a piece of the foundation to be paved over. They had forgotten one crucial detail. The foundation holds everything up. And if it's disturbed, the whole building comes crashing down. Eleanor walked back into the ballroom, her posture perfect, her smile serene. She found Richard still talking with Isabelle. She slipped her arm through his. "Darling," she said, her voice like honey, "the photographers want a picture of us. We should indulge them." Isabelle's smile faltered for a second as Eleanor met her gaze. In Eleanor's eyes there was no longer just the polite warmth of the CEO's wife. There was a glimmer of glacial ice, a warning. The game had been declared, and Eleanor Vance-Sterling was finally ready to play. The proof when it came was banal and digital. Richard had been careless, drunk on his own arrogance. He had linked his personal laptop to the family's cloud account, an account Eleanor had set up years ago. One Tuesday morning, while searching for a tax document, a folder appeared that she didn't recognize. NYC Project. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew with a sickening certainty what she would find. Clicking it open revealed not business plans, but a subfolder titled Apartment. Inside were dozens of photos. Photos of a sleek, minimalist penthouse in south of Houston Street. Photos of Isabelle, laughing, lounging on a white leather sofa. And one photo, a selfie of Richard and Isabelle, together their faces flushed with wine, and triumph the glittering skyline of Manhattan behind them. The file's date was from 3 months ago. He had bought her a home. The air left Eleanor's lungs. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a fling. This was a parallel life. For a full hour she sat in her silent, sun-drenched office, the screen glowing in front of her. The shock slowly receded, replaced by an unnerving calm. The grief was still there, but it was now contained, packed away in a box to be dealt with later. What remained was a cold, clear purpose. She downloaded the entire folder onto a secure, encrypted hard drive, then deleted the folder from the cloud and cleared the history. She covered her tracks with the precision of the operations chief she used to be. That evening, she waited. She made dinner, helped William with his summer internship application over the phone, and read a chapter of her book. She moved through the evening with an eerie, automated grace. When Richard came home around 9 p.m., humming to himself, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he was getting away with everything, she was waiting for him in the living room. She hadn't turned on the main lights, so the room was cast in the soft glow of a single lamp. The television was off. The silence was absolute. "Elle, why are you sitting in the dark?" he asked, loosening his tie. "I wanted to talk to you, Richard," she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of emotion. He sighed, tossing his briefcase onto a chair. "Look, I've had a brutal day. Can it wait?" "No," she said. "It can't." She gestured to the tablet on the coffee table. "I believe you have a new real estate investment, a project in south of Houston Street." The blood drained from Richard's face. He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. For the first time in years, the charismatic CEO was speechless. The mask of control had shattered. "How?" he stammered. "You're a brilliant visionary, Richard." Eleanor said the words, sharp as shards of glass. "But you've always been sloppy with the details. You should know better than to link your personal devices to my cloud." He sank onto the sofa opposite her, the fight visibly going out of him. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He ran a hand through his hair and stared at the floor. "How long?" Eleanor asked. "A year," he mumbled. "A little over a year." A year. A year of lies. A year of shared meals and family holidays under the shadow of this colossal betrayal. The calm she had cultivated began to fray. "She's 28 years old, Richard. She's younger than our daughter's fiancé. Her age has nothing to do with it." He snapped, a flicker of his usual arrogance returning. "She understands me. She respects what I've built." "What we built," Eleanor corrected him, her voice dangerously low. "I built this," he roared, jumping to his feet. "I was the one on the road. I was the one closing the deals while you were here playing house." The cruelty of the words struck her with physical force. 25 years of partnership erased in a single venomous sentence. That was the moment the last vestiges of love for him died. They didn't just wither. They were executed. "I see," she said, her voice now as cold as the marble floor. "So this is your decision. It's her." He looked at her, and there was no remorse in his eyes. Only impatience. A desire to get this messy, inconvenient scene over with so he could get back to his new, exciting life. "Yes," he said. "It's her. I want a divorce, Eleanor. I'll be fair. We'll split everything 50-50. You and the kids will be taken care of. You won't have to worry about a thing." He said it like he was offering her a generous severance package, as if their marriage was just another business transaction to be concluded. He truly believed it was that simple, that he could just write a check and walk away from the woman who knew every one of his secrets, every one of his weaknesses, and most importantly, every clause in the contracts that held their empire together. Eleanor stood up. She looked at the man she had loved, the father of her children, and felt nothing but a profound, hollow pity. He was so blinded by his ego, so besotted with his young admirer, that he couldn't see the abyss he was stepping into. 50-50, she repeated, a strange, small smile playing on her lips. That sounds simple enough. She walked past him and up the grand floating staircase. He called after her, "I'll have my lawyer contact yours in the morning." "You do that," she called back, not breaking her stride. In their bedroom, she closed the door and leaned against it, her body finally starting to tremble. She had held it together, but the shock waves were hitting her. But through the pain, one thought burned with absolute clarity. Richard thought this was the end of their story. He had no idea it was just the beginning of his. And he had just handed her all the ammunition she would ever need. The next morning, Richard moved out. He packed a single suitcase, his movements brisk and unapologetic. He left before the children who were home from college for the summer were even awake. There was no tearful goodbye, no final lingering look at the life he was leaving behind. It was a sterile, efficient amputation. While Richard was instructing his high-powered, notoriously aggressive lawyer, Daniel Brown, to draw up a standard amicable 50-50 split, Eleanor was making a single phone call. She didn't call the top divorce attorney in Greenwich, the one who handled all the messy hedge fund splits. She called someone different. Someone whose name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the boardrooms of Wall Street. Her name was Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was not a divorce lawyer. She was a corporate litigator, a specialist in hostile takeovers, shareholder disputes, and golden parachute clauses. She was a silver-haired shark in a Savile Row suit with a mind like a steel trap, and a reputation for surgically dismantling her opponent's cases before they ever saw the inside of a courtroom. She and Eleanor had served on a non-profit board together years ago, and Eleanor had never forgotten her incisive, strategic mind. They met not in a stuffy law office, but in the quiet, wood-paneled library of the Yale Club in Manhattan. "Eleanor," Evelyn said, her handshake firm, "you look tired." "I am," Eleanor admitted, "but I am not broken." For an hour, Eleanor laid out the entire story, from the first suspicious text to Richard's arrogant declaration of a 50-50 split. She didn't cry. She presented the facts with the detached clarity of a CEO briefing her board. She concluded by sliding the encrypted hard drive across the polished table. He bought his mistress a penthouse with marital assets. It's all there. Evelyn plugged the drive into her laptop. She scrolled through the photos and documents in silence, her expression unreadable. When she was done, She closed the laptop and looked at Eleanor. The apartment is a tactical advantage. It proves infidelity and misappropriation of funds. It's leverage for a more favorable settlement, perhaps 60-40. Daniel Brown will fight it, drag it out. Claim it was a gift from his personal income, and it will get ugly and public. You'll win, but it will be a war of attrition. Eleanor shook her head. I'm not interested in a war of attrition, Evelyn. And I'm not interested in 60-40. Evelyn raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. What are you interested in? I'm interested in the foundation, Eleanor said. She then began to speak not about the affair, but about the genesis of Ethelred Technologies. She reminded Evelyn of the climate 2 decades ago, the struggle to secure their Series A funding from a deeply conservative private equity firm, Sterling Thorne. They saw Richard as a liability, Eleanor explained, a brilliant but volatile founder. They were investing in the technology, but they were terrified he'd do something to implode the company. So they insisted on certain things. Safeguards. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes glinting with professional interest. What kind of safeguards? We called them the covenant clauses. They're buried deep in the primary shareholder agreement and cross-referenced in the loan documents with our primary lender, specifically Section 12, subsection C. The moral turpitude clause, Evelyn said, a slow smile spreading across her face. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of a predator scenting blood. And the key person provision, Eleanor added. It names Richard as the essential visionary, the CEO. But it also names me, Eleanor Vance-Sterling, as the essential stabilizing partner and co-founder. My resignation as COO was contingent on me retaining a board seat and my founder's shares. If either of us is removed from the company or engages in conduct that brings the company into public disrepute, the investors have the right to call in their debt and reclaim their equity at its original value. In effect, they can gut the company. For 20 years, those clauses had been dormant, a relic of a time when Ethelred was a fragile startup. Now they were nuclear weapons. His very public affair with a junior consultant, whom he then hired in a senior role, setting her up in a multi-million-dollar apartment, would that qualify as bringing the company into public disrepute? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. With a little push in the right direction for the media, it would be a textbook case. Evelyn confirmed, her mind clearly racing. The board would panic, the shareholders would revolt, the stock would plummet the moment word got out. Richard has forgotten those clauses exist, Eleanor said. He sees me as the wife he's divorcing. He doesn't see me as the co-founder who holds the kill switch to the company he loves more than anything. Evelyn Reed closed her notebook. This is no longer a divorce, Eleanor. This is a corporate restructuring. Richard and his lawyer are playing checkers. We, my dear, are about to play chess. For the next few weeks, while Richard and Isabelle were flaunting their newfound freedom, Eleanor and Evelyn worked in the shadows. They didn't file for divorce immediately. They prepared. Evelyn's team of forensic accountants discreetly began tracing the money used for the penthouse. They compiled a dossier on Isabelle's meteoric rise within the company, highlighting the obvious conflict of interest. Most importantly, they drafted a series of letters to be sent to the board of Sterling Thorne, and the bank ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. Eleanor, meanwhile, played her part to perfection. She communicated with Richard only through brief, polite emails regarding the children. To the outside world, she was the dignified, wronged wife, retreating from the public eye to heal. No one knew she was spending her days not grieving, but preparing for battle. She was transforming her pain forging it into a weapon of devastating precision. The quiet, predictable fixture was sharpening her edges. With Eleanor's silence and seeming retreat, Richard and Isabelle felt they had won. Their victory was not just private, it was a spectacle. They were intoxicated by the freedom, the drama, the sheer power of it all. They debuted as a couple at a high-profile tech summit in Austin. Isabelle was radiant on Richard's arm, a physical trophy of his new life. She was no longer just a consultant. He had promoted her to Chief Strategy Officer, a move that raised eyebrows on the board, but was met with no public opposition. Their life was a whirlwind of indulgent public displays. They were photographed courtside, at Knicks games, dining at Per Se, and weekending in the Hamptons at a ridiculously expensive rental, as the Greenwich estate was still technically Eleanor's residence. Isabelle's social media, once a curated stream of professional insights, transformed into a showcase of her new status. There were pictures of the view from the south of Houston Street penthouse, a close-up of a new Cartier bracelet on her wrist, captioned, "Best strategy session ever," and a candid-looking shot of Richard laughing on a private jet. To Isabelle, this wasn't just a relationship, it was an acquisition. She had acquired the man, and with him the life she had always craved. She immersed herself in planning their future. She hired a top interior designer to gut and renovate the penthouse. She was already sketching out plans for a lavish wedding in Lake Como. She saw the divorce from Eleanor as a simple financial transaction, a nuisance, but a necessary one. "Don't worry about her," she would tell Richard as they lay in bed in the penthouse, the city lights twinkling below them. "Daniel Brown will crush her. She's a housewife. What does she know about hardball negotiations?" Richard, his ego endlessly stroked by Isabelle's adoration, agreed. "You're right. Eleanor's world is the charity circuit and the PTA. She's out of her depth. We're offering her $250 million. She'll take the money and go quietly." Their hubris was a bubble of their own making, floating higher and higher, ever more detached from reality. Richard, a man who had built an empire on predicting risks, had the biggest blind spot of all the women he had spent 25 years with. He saw the Eleanor he had left the quiet, accommodating wife, and was incapable of imagining the Eleanor he had created a woman with nothing left to lose and a perfect long-term memory. Inside Ethelred Technologies, the atmosphere was tense. Employees whispered in hallways. The blatant nepotism of Isabelle's promotion and her constant overbearing presence in meetings created resentment. She had no respect for the company's established culture, seeing it as a relic of Eleanor's era. She pushed for aggressive, risky new ventures, dismissing the cautious, long-term strategies that had made the company stable and successful. She was dismantling the old guard and replacing them with her own people. Richard, blinded by his infatuation, saw it as dynamic leadership. "She's shaking things up exactly as I wanted," he boasted to his CFO, a long-time friend named George. George, who had been with the company since the beginning and remembered Eleanor's shrewd negotiations, tried to caution him. "Richard, the optics of this are terrible, and frankly, Isabelle's projections for the Asia expansion are optimistic to the point of fantasy. You're moving too fast." "George, you sound like Eleanor," Richard sneered. "Cautious, afraid to take risks. That's why I'm the CEO and you're the CFO." The insult hung in the air, and George said no more. The warning had been given and ignored. The pinnacle of their self-delusion came a week before the first scheduled mediation. Richard received the initial proposal from Eleanor's lawyer. It was a simple 2-page document that acknowledged his offer of a 50-50 split of all liquid assets, property, and stock. There were no demands for alimony, no dramatic accusations. Richard and Isabelle read it over a bottle of Cristal in the penthouse. "See," Isabelle said, triumphant. "I told you, she's rolling over. She knows she can't fight you. She just wants her money so she can go back to her boring life." She swirled her champagne, a smug, satisfied smile on her face. $250 million to go away. I'd say we got off easy. Richard felt a surge of relief and vindication. It's for the best. It's clean, amicable. He instructed his lawyer, Daniel Brown, to accept the premise and schedule the final mediation to sign the papers. Brown was suspicious. It was too easy. "Richard, I've never seen a case of this magnitude settle this quickly or this cleanly," Brown warned over the phone. "There's something we're not seeing. Who is her lawyer?" "Some woman named Evelyn Reed. I think she does corporate law. Eleanor probably got a referral from one of her charity friends," Richard said dismissively. "Just get it done, Daniel. Isabelle and I want to finalize our wedding plans." And so they walked willingly and arrogantly into the perfectly laid trap. They spent the days leading up to the mediation, celebrating their victory. Isabelle finalized the purchase of a 10-carat diamond engagement ring. Richard authorized the down payment on a new Gulfstream G650 jet. They were spending money they didn't yet have, so certain was their victory. They were living in a fool's paradise, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was about to give way. Eleanor had let them build their castle of dreams as high as they wanted. She knew that the higher it was, the more devastating the fall would be. The mediation was scheduled for 10 a.m. in a neutral, soulless conference room in a midtown office building. The room was dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the grim grey sky outside. Richard and Isabelle arrived first, accompanied by their lawyer, Daniel Brown, and a junior associate. Richard was the picture of magnanimous power in a crisp navy suit. Isabelle wore a cream-colored dress from the Row, an outfit that whispered, unassailable wealth. She carried a Birkin bag and looked more like a future board member than a home wrecker. They were a power couple projecting an aura of bored inevitability. They were there to sign some papers and get on with their fabulous lives. Eleanor arrived precisely at 10 a.m., with Evelyn Reed by her side. Eleanor was dressed simply in a grey charcoal pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a neat chignon. She wore no jewelry, except her old wedding band, a detail that was not lost on Richard. She looked tired, he thought, but composed. Evelyn Reed was a quiet storm in pinstripes, her eyes missing nothing. They took their seats. The air was thick with unspoken hostility. Daniel Brown began his voice smooth and practiced. "Well, I'm glad we could all come together to resolve this amicably. We have reviewed your initial acceptance of our client's generous 50-50 proposal. We have the draft settlement agreement here, which divides all major assets, the Greenwich property, the Hamptons house, the art collection, and all shares in Ethelred Technologies down the middle. It's clean, straightforward, and more than fair." He pushed a thick document across the table. Evelyn Reed didn't even look at it. She placed her own, much slimmer folder on the table. "Thank you, Mr. Brown," she said, her voice calm and clear. "My client appreciates the simplicity of your proposal. However, we seem to be operating under a misapprehension of the assets being divided." Richard scoffed. "Misapprehension? It's all there. The company was valued at $500 million last quarter. It's simple math. The valuation is precisely the issue. Evelyn said, opening her folder. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table to Daniel Brown. This is a copy of the original Series A shareholder agreement between Ethelred Technologies and Sterling Thorne Capital, executed 22 years ago. She then slid another paper over. And this is a copy of the primary loan covenant with Deutsche Bank. Daniel Brown's eyes scanned the documents. His confident demeanor began to evaporate, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then alarm. I'd like to draw your attention to Section 12, subsection C of the shareholder agreement. Evelyn continued, her voice cutting through the silence. The moral turpitude clause. It states that if a key officer defined as Richard Sterling or Eleanor Vance-Sterling engages in conduct that could reasonably be expected to bring the company into public disrepute or scandal, Sterling Thorne has the right to exercise its options, which includes calling in all outstanding debt and forcing a sale of the offending officer's shares back to the company at their original purchase price. Richard stared at her dumbfounded. That's an archaic clause. It's never been enforced. It's meaningless. On the contrary, Evelyn said, her gaze unwavering. We took the liberty of speaking with John Thorne yesterday. He's very concerned about the sudden promotion of a junior consultant to Chief Strategy Officer with whom you are having a very public affair, about the purchase of a $6 million penthouse using marital assets that are intrinsically tied to the company's value. He's particularly concerned about how the Wall Street Journal might frame such a story. An unstable founder, nepotism, misuse of funds. It's a narrative that tends to make shareholders very, very nervous. The color drained from Richard's face. Isabelle shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her perfect composure finally cracking. Evelyn wasn't finished. Then there is the key person provision. It names both of you, Richard as the visionary and Eleanor as the stabilizing partner and co-founder. Her presence on the board, even in a non-executive capacity, is a condition of the agreement. Her forced departure through a contentious divorce, followed by her shares being sold on the open market, would trigger the same clauses. She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. So you see, we have a problem. Your actions, Mr. Sterling, have given your primary investors and your bank the contractual right to bankrupt your company. This is insane, Richard blustered, looking at his lawyer for help. She can't do this. Daniel Brown was pale. He knew exactly what Evelyn was saying. It was a perfectly executed, legally sound checkmate. The current valuation of Ethelred Technologies at $500 million is contingent on its stability, Evelyn explained as if to a child. If these clauses are triggered, the debt becomes due, the stock becomes worthless, and the investors take control. The company's valuation ceases to be $500 million. It becomes zero. She finally looked directly at Richard, her eyes like chips of ice. So when you offer my client 50% of your shares, you are not offering her $125 million. You are offering her 50% of nothing. Silence. The truth of it landed in the room with a sickening thud. Isabelle stared at Richard, her eyes wide with dawning horror. The life she had built in her mind, the Lake Como wedding, the private jet, the endless river of money, was evaporating before her eyes. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. I am not going to destroy the company we built, Richard, she said, looking at her husband. I'm not going to do that to our employees or our children's legacy. A flicker of hope appeared in Richard's eyes. So, Eleanor continued, here is our counter-proposal. This is not a negotiation. Evelyn slid a final document across the table. Eleanor will receive 90% of all liquid assets. She will receive the Greenwich estate and the Hamptons home free and clear. You will retain the south of Houston Street penthouse. She will receive sole ownership of the art collection. In return for this, and for you ceding your voting rights on the board to her, she will agree not to trigger the clauses. She will remain on the board as a silent partner, thus ensuring the stability the investors require. She paused. This agreement also stipulates that Ms. Dubois, she said, glancing at Isabelle, for the first time with undisguised contempt, is to be terminated from her position at Ethelred Technologies, effective immediately. Isabelle gasped, looking at Richard, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. "You're leaving me with nothing!" Richard choked out, his voice hoarse. "My shares, my company." "We are leaving you with your company," Evelyn corrected him coldly. "You will remain CEO. You will still draw your salary. You will retain 10% of your founder's shares, which are still worth a considerable amount of money. But you will be, in essence, an employee. Eleanor will be your landlord, your boss, your bank. This is the only deal that allows Ethelred Technologies to survive. I suggest you take it." Richard Sterling, the titan of industry, the oracle of Silicon Alley, slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. He looked at Eleanor, truly looked at her, and saw not the mousy wife he'd dismissed, but the brilliant, ruthless strategist he'd once built an empire with. The woman he had forgotten. And in that moment, he knew he had lost. He hadn't just lost his fortune. He had lost control. He had lost everything that mattered. The signing of the settlement felt less like a legal procedure and more like a surrender. Richard's hand trembled as he signed away the vast majority of the fortune he had long considered solely his. Isabelle sat beside him, rigid and silent, her face a thunderous mask of fury. The moment the lawyers concluded the meeting, she stood up without a word and walked out, not even glancing at Richard. Her dream had turned to dust, and the man who had promised it to her was no longer a king, but a court jester in a kingdom he no longer ruled. Her exit from his life was as swift and brutal as her entrance. She didn't just leave the conference room. She left the south of Houston Street penthouse that afternoon. When Richard arrived back at the apartment that was now his only significant asset, he found it empty. Her closets were bare, her personal effects gone. The only thing she'd left behind was the 10-carat engagement ring sitting contemptuously on the marble kitchen island. There was no note. Her message was clear: a king without a kingdom held no value for her. Her calls to him went straight to voicemail. Within a week, her social media was wiped clean of any mention of him, and her professional profile listed her as on sabbatical seeking new opportunities. She had vanished from his life as completely as if she had never existed. Richard was left in the sterile, empty penthouse, a monument to his own folly. He was still the CEO of Ethelred Technologies, but it was a hollow title. He went to work each day, but the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The board, now aware of the kill switches Eleanor held, treated him with a cautious, formal distance. His friend George, the CFO, looked at him with a mixture of pity and "I told you so" disappointment. Every major decision had to be run past the board, where Eleanor's voting proxy was the deciding factor. He was a figurehead, a ghost rattling around the executive suite he had once commanded. The fire in his belly, the arrogant certainty that had propelled him for decades, was gone, replaced by a gnawing, bitter humiliation. For Eleanor, life began anew. The first thing she did was change the locks on the Greenwich estate. The second was to take her children, Olivia and William, on a month-long trip to Italy. They didn't talk much about the divorce. Instead, they reconnected. They explored Florence, hiked in Tuscany, and ate pasta on the Amalfi Coast. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the weight of being Mrs. Sterling, lifted from her shoulders. She laughed freely. She slept soundly. She was not a wronged wife or a corporate strategist anymore. She was simply Eleanor. When she returned, she didn't retreat into a quiet life of leisure. The woman who had built the operational side of Ethelred from scratch found that her mind, long dormant, was buzzing with ideas. She sold off a portion of the art collection and used the capital to start a venture capital fund, Vance Capital, with a specific mission to invest in tech startups, founded and led by women. Her new office was a light-filled space in a repurposed factory in Stamford, a world away from the imposing glass tower of Ethelred. She was sought after, not as a society wife, but as a brilliant investor and mentor. Her story, which inevitably leaked in hushed tones through the financial world, didn't make her an object of pity. It made her a legend. She was the quiet co-founder who had played the long game, the woman who had checkmated a king with a move no one saw coming. She rarely saw Richard. Their interactions were confined to quarterly board reports and brief, sterile emails about the children. One day, about a year after the settlement, she saw him by chance at a coffee shop near her new office. He looked older, smaller somehow. The charismatic aura had been replaced by a weary resignation. They made brief eye contact. He gave her a hesitant, almost pleading nod. She simply nodded back a polite but distant acknowledgement before turning to pay for her coffee and walking out. There was no hatred left. There was nothing left at all. Eleanor had not set out for revenge. She had simply refused to be erased. She had defended what was hers, not just the money, but the truth of her contribution, her partnership, and her worth. She had reminded her husband and the world that the quiet, unseen work of a woman, whether in a boardroom or a home, is not a footnote to a man's success. It is the foundation upon which the entire structure rests. And a wise person never, ever underestimates the foundation. 2 years passed. The storm of the Sterling divorce had subsided, becoming just another piece of high society lore whispered about at charity galas and in the private dining rooms of Manhattan. The players had scattered their lives, diverging onto paths none of them could have predicted. Eleanor stood in the sunlit, open-plan office of Vance Capital. The space was nothing like the intimidating, sterile fortress of Ethelred. It was alive with exposed, brick, vibrant art by female artists and the low, energetic hum of a dozen conversations. She was listening to a young woman named Maya, the 26-year-old founder of a biotech startup, who was nervously stumbling through her pitch. And so our proprietary algorithm can predict. I'm sorry, Maya faltered, her face flushing. Eleanor held up a hand, her smile gentle. Breathe, Maya. You're trying to sell me the what. I'm already interested in the what. Tell me about the why. Why did you quit your PhD program to pursue this? What was the moment you knew you had to? The question shifted the energy. Maya looked up, her eyes clearing. She spoke of her grandmother's misdiagnosed illness, the frustration with a healthcare system that was reactive instead of predictive. Her passion filled the room, raw and authentic. When she finished, Eleanor didn't look at the financial projections on the tablet. She looked at the young woman. When Richard and I were trying to get our first round of funding, Eleanor said, her voice reflective. A very powerful man told me I was too cautious. He said I was the brakes on Richard's accelerator. For years I believed him. I thought my diligence was a weakness. She leaned forward slightly. It wasn't. It was the entire architecture. Your passion is the engine, Maya, but your diligence is the architecture that will keep your company standing. Don't ever let anyone tell you it's a weakness. She approved the seed funding on the spot. This was her new life. It wasn't about tearing something down. It was about building things up. She wasn't managing a legacy. She was creating dozens of new ones. Her victory hadn't made her hard. It had made her wise, and in wisdom, she'd found a quiet, profound joy that no amount of money could have bought. Richard Sterling, meanwhile, lived in the echo chamber of his former glory. The south of Houston Street penthouse, once a symbol of his virile new beginning, now felt like a mausoleum. The minimalist white furniture and vast expanses of glass only amplified his solitude. He remained CEO of Ethelred, a king in a ceremonial role. He gave keynote speeches at conferences, his face still gracing the occasional magazine cover. But those who worked with him knew the truth. He was a ghost haunting the halls of an empire he no longer controlled. One evening, scrolling through the Wall Street Journal on his tablet, he saw a feature, the new matriarchs of venture capital. There was a picture of Eleanor, standing with 3 of the female founders she had backed. She looked luminous, not younger but more vibrant, more herself than he had seen her in 20 years. The article praised her preternatural eye for foundational strength and her quiet, unshakable confidence. He read the words foundational strength and felt a bitter, hollow ache in his chest. That was her. That had always been her. He was the visionary, the salesman, the star. But she was the one who made sure the stage wouldn't collapse. He had mistaken her quiet competence for passive complacency. He hadn't just lost a wife and a fortune. He had fired his single greatest advisor, the only person who had ever truly understood both his genius and his folly. He closed the tablet, the reflection in the dark screen showing a tired grey man. The oracle of Silicon Alley was finally, irrevocably alone with his thoughts. The final echo of the past appeared as it so often does in the modern world on a screen. Eleanor was at the Greenwich house now, warmed by her presence and filled with pictures of her children and the art she truly loved. Her daughter Olivia was visiting for the weekend. "Oh my God, Mum, you have to see this," Olivia said, turning her laptop around. "Talk about rebranding." On the screen was a clip from a popular morning talk show. The guest was a woman with soft, flowing hair, dressed in what could only be described as wellness beige. She spoke in the calm, measured tones of a self-help guru. It took Eleanor a moment to realize it was Isabelle Dubois. She looked different, softer. The sharp, predatory edges had been professionally sanded down. The chyron beneath her read, Isabelle Dubois, empowerment strategist and author. "And that's what my book, The Gilded Cage, is all about," Isabelle was saying to the host. "It's about how ambitious women can lose themselves in the orbit of powerful, narcissistic men. You become an accessory to their success, and you forget your own power." Eleanor felt a surreal wave of detachment wash over her. "I was in a relationship that the media portrayed in a very simplistic way." Isabelle continued, a single, perfect tear welling in her eye. "But I was trapped. I realized that my value was not in being his partner, but in reclaiming my own narrative. My escape was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it allowed me to find my authentic self. I walked away from it all, the money, the power, the private jets, with nothing but my own integrity." Olivia snorted. "Integrity? She walked away because you left her with nothing. She's erased you and Dad completely and painted herself as a victim." Eleanor watched a slow, sad smile touching her lips. She wasn't angry. She was, to her own surprise, fascinated. This was Isabelle's ultimate PR move. Unable to seize an existing empire, she had simply created her own, a flimsy kingdom built on curated victimhood and marketable wellness platitudes. She hadn't learned a thing, but she had brilliantly repackaged her failure as a triumph of the self. Eleanor reached over and gently closed Olivia's laptop. "It doesn't matter, sweetheart," she said. And she realized with a clarity that felt like the final definitive victory that it truly didn't. Isabelle could have her audience. Richard could have his gilded cage. She had something far more valuable. She had the foundation. And this time she was building an empire of her own, on her own terms, for everyone to see. So what's the real lesson in the story of Richard, Eleanor, and Isabelle? It's a powerful reminder that the loudest person in the room isn't always the most powerful. Isabelle thought she had won because she had the man's attention, but Eleanor won because she had his secrets, and she understood the true source of their power. She played chess while they were playing checkers. This story is a testament to quiet strength, long-term strategy, and the fatal mistake of underestimating a partner you've taken for granted. In the end, Eleanor didn't just get the money. She reclaimed her story, her power, and her future. If you were captivated by Eleanor's incredible story of strategy and survival, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more real-life stories of drama, intrigue, and ultimate justice, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. I want to hear from you. What was the most shocking twist for you in this story? Was Eleanor a hero, or was she too ruthless? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for listening.